Bom dia a todos, sejam bem-vindos. Vejo que entrou aqui a Priscila. Good morning, Priscilla.
You hear me?
Yes, the audio is fine, thank you.
Fantastic.
People are arriving, so it's nice if we can wait 2-3 minutes. How are you doing today?
Well, I just had lunch with the people of the Gambero Rosso, you remember from.
Yes, sure.
So they said I should say hello to you.
Okay, thank you. Lorenzo,
No, Marco Sabelli.
Marco Saberico, claro, sim. Great memories of that trip to Rome.
Yes.
With them and you, of course. Now we have already some people here. Priscilla, I heard that some great wine collectors will be here today listening. So it's a great moment.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you for this interview.
Thank you very much.
I believe this is your first live interview. Is that right?
Correct. It's the first time live interview.
So it's an honor that this interview is for me and for Brazil. It's a great honor.
An honor for me that you asked and that you organized it.
Thank you very much. My friends, Priscilla, the Marquise Priscilla Incisa della Rocchetta, is the granddaughter of the late Marquise Mario Incisa della Rocchetta, the great guy who invented this concept of this fantastic wine, SASSICAIA, the most famous wines from Italy and one of the greatest wines in the world. Priscilla, the days that follow the previous of this interview, I had lots of messages, emails, lots of people telling me that to some of them, SASSICAIA was the best wine they'd ever tasted.
Thank you.
And they are very happy for this interview. And a common friend of us, Christian Wiley from Garzon, sent your regards to you.
Very much.
And sent me photos of the event for Wine Spectator when SASSICAIA was elected Wine of the Year.
Yeah, we received the prize last year actually.
Yes, with the 15 vintage. And personally, I think 16, which I have here, I think 16 is even better.
Thank you.
We talk about this later. We have already some good quorum, and I think we could start. First of all, I met Priscilla in 2017 in a fantastic vertical tasting of SASSICAIA. To one who doesn't know, vertical tasting is a tasting where you taste different vintages of the same wine. And we tasted, by the time, all SASSICAIAs since the first one.
I think it was 2013 the last one, right? We tasted 68 to 2013.
Yes, yes. By the time 13 was the latest one, I think. And then I repeated that tasting last year in Rio with friends from Wines Live. Flavio, I believe he's watching. Hello, Flavio. Thank you for being here. And we repeated that tasting, beginning in 68 and ending in 2016. 47 vintages. And one fantastic conclusion is that the wines that were collected throughout the world by Flavio were as good as in Rome. We had no deception. And it was a fantastic tasting. Well, first question to you. Could you tell us a little bit about the history of SASSICAIA, of Tenuta San Guido?
Of course. So, first of all, I need to just very quickly explain where we are because maybe not everybody knows exactly where Tenuta San Guido is. We are on the Tuscan coast in an area called Maremma, about 50 kilometers south of Pisa. And our family has been here for many generations. And the estate of Tenuta San Guido comes on the side of my grandmother. And my grandparents married in 1930 and they moved to Bolgheri to live because my grandfather was coming from Piemonte, so different region. He was very passionate about wine, of course, but especially wine from France. He loved wines made with Cabernet Sauvignon, so from the area. And during the war, it was quite difficult to get hold of the wines he liked so much. And he remembered that when he was a student in Pisa in the 1920s, he had tried some Cabernet Sauvignon-based wines produced at the estate of some friends called the Salviati family. So he went off to near Pisa again to these friends, and he got some plants of some vines of Cabernet, and he started an experiment in Bolgheri on the hills of Tenuta San Guido, and this was the beginning of the 1940s. And so Sassicaia was really a wine that was born out of interest and passion of our grandfather. There was no intention of producing a wine for the commerce to be sold, and the wine was produced entirely for family and friends, a very small production. And my grandfather at the beginning was looked a bit like with suspicion, because he was a kind of a foreigner in Tuscany, because he was coming from Piemonte, so a different region, and he was make good quality wine here in Bolgheri. You know, on the Tuscan coast, it wasn't the area which was known for making nice wine in this part. Started really an experiment, and for about 20 years, Sassicaia was drunk only among family and friends. And the first commercial vintage was 1968. So from the beginning of the 1970s, we were on the market, and this new, let's say, commercial venture was started by my father Nicolò, who at the time was starting to work alongside his father at the estate. So my father had a brother and a sister, and they were more into the horses, because I don't know if everybody knows, we also are breeding and training English thoroughbred horses for flat racing since those times, and we still are doing. And so while his older brother and sister were more involved with the horses, my father was more involved with the agriculture, and he developed, together with his cousin Piero Antinori, this new dimension of Sassicaia on the market by employing the enologist that was working at the time for the Antinori family, Giacomo Takis, who then stayed with us until he retired in 2009. I would say Sassicaia is really the history behind it is really a history of strong family roots, passion, and a bit somebody who tried to do something different, like discovering an area, like pioneer of this area. Luckily, my grandfather had a very strong character. So although at the beginning people thought it was a strange experiment, planting Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet and Bolgheri, he continued throughout the years, and he was obviously proved right.
Well, some things I have to highlight. First, your grandfather was from Piemonte, and your grandmother from Tuscany. It's like Jupiter and Mars, something that are very opposite. So growing vines in Tuscany, being from Piemonte in Italy, I know that is a radical thing. And another thing, planting in Bolgheri, that was a distant place by the time, not for vines. And then planting Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc was very out of the standard.
Yes.
And I remember you told me that Sassicaia was the wine that your family drank for Christmas. It was not a commercial wine. Yeah. So Santa Claus was very generous to you. And other things to highlight, Giacomo Takis in Italy is like God. He was a great enologist with a long history in wines, and was very friend of Emile Peynaud, right?
Yes, very right. Correct.
who is a reference in enology for the century in Bordeaux, the great enologist from Bordeaux from the last century who reinvented Bordeaux. So another question, Sassicaia was for long called a Super Tuscan. What's that and how was born this name?
Well, first of all, I have to go one step backwards. Sassicaia's first vintage was the 1960 on the market that came out in 1971. And at that time, area didn't have any appellation for whites or for reds, for nothing. So Sassicaia was being produced, was labeled as a vino da tavola for many. And the term for Tuscan, if I remember well, I think it was invented by Anglo-Saxon press, mostly journalists from England or UK, from UK or America. No, I don't know exactly who invented the word, but it was used to define a certain kind of wine which was produced from the 1970s in Tuscany, in regions which had an appellation, but those wines were made in a different way. They were not following the rules of the appellation, and therefore they had to be called something because they were usually more expensive than the appellation itself, and they were vini da tavola. So they started to call them Super Tuscan. I think Sassicaia is like a bit the pioneer of this movement in the sense that when it was first made, there was no appellation at all. So it wasn't breaking any rule. Until 1994, Bolgheri didn't have any appellation for red wines. And when the appellation was created for reds, there was also a sub-zone of the Bolgheri DLC that was created on purpose for Sassicaia. So the rules came after the wine. The rules were made around the wine and not the other way around. And so since 1994, we can write on the label Bolgheri Sassicaia DOC, and since 2000, if I remember well, the two appellations have completely separated. So now the Consorzio in Bolgheri is managing two different appellations, Bolgheri DOC and Bolgheri Sassicaia DOC. So it didn't change anything to the just format. Now we have separate DOCs.
Okay. We can say maybe that Sassicaia is a monopoly if it were in France. It has its own dock. It's fantastic.
The land is all in Tenuta San Guido, so yes, it's a monopoly.
So the first vintage, commercial vintage, was 68, which I tasted, and it's the most fantastic of the old Sassicaias. But there were other vintages, non-commercial, when they really started Sassicaia.
Well, the first vintage, the first experiments were in the beginning of the 1940s. So you asking what was for 68? Is that correct? Good.
Yes, yes. So in the 40s. So you have maybe 20 years of experiments before the commercial first vintage.
Exactly. So the first proper vineyard was planted in 42, and the first wine was made in 45. And from 45 to 68, so basically 20 years, it was just consumed at home. So, you know, like 2, 3, 4 barrels, but just for friends and family. Because at the time, the activity after the war was mostly with traditional agriculture, like it is now. We were producing olive oil, like we are still producing now. And we had the horses. So activities of the family was not producing wine, but it was mostly horses and agriculture. So the wine, let's say, took over and became our business much later.
And those old bottles before 68, does it still exist? Do you have?
Now we have no, there's nothing. Very, very 2, 3.
Is it possible to find in the market?
Sorry? In the market.
Is it possible to find?
No, because the ones before 68 were never sold to anybody. So no, you don't find them.
So Flavio, a target to you. Try to find one of those bottles for our next tasting.
Yeah.
And I remember when we tasted in Rome, there were, I think, 2 vintages that were not made, right? 69 and 73, right?
Exactly, 69 because it was used in the blend for 68. And at the beginning was when Takis was doing some little experiments, and also the total was very small, so they were kind of still trying out different. The 1973 was not produced because it wasn't a very good vintage, and for the same reason, we had about 5 hectares of vineyard at the time. The vineyards were very young, and so they would have had to select too much to have made enough wine that was worth bottling and selling. So my grandfather just decided to skip one vintage.
Okay, let's talk a little bit now about the land. Could you describe a little bit how is the terroir, climate, soil in Bolgheri to SASSICAIA?
Well, first we have to mention maybe Bolgheri in general, because it's a very special location, geographical location. As I said before, we are on the seaside, on the coast, and so let's say Bolgheri vineyards are facing west towards the sea, and behind, up to on the east side, we are surrounded by like an amphitheater of hills, which were already interesting for the Etruscans in antiquity, because these are called the colline metallifere, where the Etruscans were digging minerals. So there are a few elements which all combined make Bolgheri a very special microclimate for growing grapes, and obviously Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, they find really their home here. Another very important influence is the luminosity given by the mirroring of the seawater. So there's always a lot of light in the summer when the grapes have to mature. But the fact that we are so close to the sea creates special conditions with, in the summer, some breezes coming from the sea, which make it less hot than the rest of Tuscany. For example, compared to Chianti, in Bolgheri is always a lot fresher. I mean, except in those years when it's really hot everywhere. Bolgheri, the summer is warm, unbearable. And also another characteristic is this quantity of forest we have on the hills, especially if I think of Tenuta San Guido. We have a total surface of about 2,500 hectares, and 1,000, almost 500 hectares are covered with forest. So we have a big patch of green, uncontaminated forest, and some of our vineyards are situated on the higher part of the hills, up to about 400 meters above sea level, surrounded by this typical Tuscan Maremma forest, which also conveys nice scents to the wine. We have a lot of bushes, and we also have this effect of freshness and humidity created by the surrounding forest. Summer shelters the vineyards from the excessive sunburn, So it's all a combination of soils. I said before, colline metallifere, but soils that are also rich in limestone and clay, with a lot of stones. The name SASSICAIA actually means stony ground in the local dialect. So it's also a bit the conditions that our grandfather thought would be good for Cabernet, because he saw that in Bordeaux, in Graves, also soil was full of pebbles, like here a little bit. So, it's a combination of factors: the sea, hills, the forest, the special soils, which makes Bolgheri very interesting with a lot of different microclimates. So it's not a homogeneous area, it's quite heterogeneous, but very interesting.
Seems to be a paradise for grapes.
Yes.
You mentioned limestone, gravel, pebbles, stones, 400 meters altitude, near the sea. So seems to be the perfect place for Van de Garde, a red wine for long keeping. And since the beginning, SASSICAIA or Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc. And as far as I can read in the technical sheets, never change it. This is rare.
Rare. Well, the combination was adjusted. It used to be a little bit less Cabernet Sauvignon, a little bit more Cabernet Franc. Now we have ourselves on 85-15 roughly. That's and since we have the DOC since 1994, we have now a set of rules, a disciplinare, and minimum 80% Cabernet Sauvignon. So we can't change much anymore, you know.
Yes, I do a lot of vertical tastings on wines, and from new wines, like, yeah, you are old world, but it's a new wine. It has 50 years, so it's a young project. And usually, in the first decade or two, you are changing lots of grapes and the way you make the wines, and except for variations in the kinds of wood you use, the rest doesn't change much. At least doesn't seem to have changed much.
Oh.
Can you talk about this? I saw you started with a big botti, and now you use barrique. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. I think the big barrels, botti, were used also to do the fermentation when my grandfather was still involved in the production. And then when Takis arrived, he kind of brought some innovations which at the time seemed very innovative, like temperature control, stainless steel tanks that we're still using today. They were very modern at the time, and now they are like standard, you know. But we're still using the same system like Takis had put in place together with our grandfather, and it's kind of a formula which has worked for so many years, and we haven't changed much. I mean, we do a very classic fermentation in steel. We don't use artificial yeasts, so the fermentation starts spontaneously about 36 to 48 hours after the grapes have arrived in the winery. We usually harvest at the very end of August. We start with the Merlot that we use for the other wine we produce with Alberto, and then Cabernet Sauvignon, usually, and Cabernet Franc are harvested in September. So, I mean, also in the winery, the process of vinification is quite the same procedures that we follow year after year. Of course, there are some adaptations according to the vintage conditions, but there's not much technology. There's a lot of mano d'opera, I don't know how you say, handwork, you know, a lot of people. So also in the vineyards, everything is picked by hand, and a lot of in the winery, and then after the fermentations, alcoholic and malolactic, the wine for 2 years almost, about 20 to 30 months in French oak barrique, so the classic 205 years, which are only 1/3 new every year. So the oak is never very prominent. So all in all, we look for elegance and drinkability and pleasant wines, rather than necessarily a lot of extraction or a lot of wood. So we try to avoid that. Even when we do the fermentation, like the maceration is never very long, for example. We harvest always a bit before the others. I mean, little tricks to try to have always very elegant wines, which are also suited for long aging, of course.
Well, I don't know if you notice, natural wine lovers, it's natural yeast. Savage is so, Sassicaia is also a kind of natural wine too. Well, I was writing here, we've done 2 verticals of Sassicaia. And usually when I do verticals of wines, especially young wines like Sassicaia, I noticed that the style changed through years. And Sassicaia didn't. You have the same style, the same level of quality through the years. That's fantastic. Usually when I taste, I did recently a complete vertical of Penfolds Grange since 1950s. And when it comes to the end of 90s, you see that the hand of Robert Parker was there, influencing. And I did this with other wines, not only Grange. But in the late 90s and early 20s, some of the wine critics call this the dark ages. And you see lots of extraction, lots of oak. And SASSICAIA wasn't seduced by that and kept the same style. That's very important to me. A concept, one style through the decades.
Yeah, very recognized. People fall in love with the style. You like it or you don't like it. But when you like it, you really like it, and it becomes kind of your favorite, you know. So very tight to the territory and to the place. Yeah. So
yes, no concession to the market. Monica is asking if it's possible to the public to visit the Tenuta.
Now, maybe not right now, because right now we are still a bit under the COVID restriction. So we have not yet opened the winery. But the best way to come and visit is to ask, to organize through our importers or through Marcelo. You know, we have an importer in Brazil, called Ravin. Ravin, is that correct? How I pronounce?
Yes, Havan. I believe they are watching.
Okay. Yes, so through them or through you, because we have a direct contact, you can apply for a visit. I would say after the summer, though. I mean, whenever people can start traveling again. I'm not sure.
Yes, right now it's difficult. Right now I don't go to the corner.
No.
Havan is here. Thank you.
Thanks.
Asking about, you have any funny, interesting case to tell us? SASSICAIA is a highly seeked wine to the world.
Yeah. Well, we yeah, I would have a few stories, but the one that I always comes back to my head, because it happened when I was a child, so it stayed impressed, is that at the beginning of the 1980s, my father started traveling to foreign countries, because SASSICAIA was starting to be more popular also abroad. And, one of the countries where going more often was Canada. So Canada is one of our first. And during one of these trips during the winter, Ontario, he saw that some people actually were queuing outside of the LCBO, you know, the monopoly shops. They were queuing to get the wines because the SASSICAIA was being released the day after, and they wanted to be there first thing when the shop was opening in order to get some bottles, because it was going out and then was sold out very fast. And he saw that these people were wearing like a badge on their jacket. It was quite cold because it was, I don't know which winter month. And the badge said, "I froze my ass for a bottle of Sass." And so my father brought one of these badges back to Italy, and he was so amazed that people in a faraway country were so much making such an effort in order to get a bottle of our wine. This was amazing. So this thing remained into my head, and I mean, it's a nice memory from when I go to Canada. I always think about
this. Suggestion, Havan, print some t-shirts like this to Brazil. That would be nice. And asking about other projects. Well, I have here Guidalberto also. Can you tell a little bit about this wine?
Yeah, of course. I would say around the end of the 1990s, I realized that we had planted enough vineyards in order to have enough grapes to produce more than enough SASSICAIA, and so he could make a selection of these grapes, and some of those were left over, and he could then start to think of producing another wine. Because in fact, we don't like to call Guidalberto the second wine of SASSICAIA. It's just another wine that we produce alongside SASSICAIA, which has a different concept. First of all, the blend is different. It's a blend of Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. It has 40% Merlot. Also a grape which has become very popular in the Bolgheri area. And Guidalberto was also kind of conceived for a larger public because of its price point. So more people can get in touch with the Tenuta San Guido style, the Tenuta San Guido products through Guidalberto. It's a wine which doesn't need to be aged as long as Sassicaia, so you can drink it younger. Although we have tried the older vintages, because now we are in the 20th year. The first vintage was 2000, and we have tried some old vintages back to those times. The wine can age for 20 years, but having said that, you can enjoy it younger. It's easily approachable as a young wine compared to Sassicaia. So because of the price point, the idea was to catch a larger public, and also to have another product in order to select from the Sassicaia, so improve the quality of the Sassicaia and have alongside another wine. And the name Guidalberto actually refers to an ancestor of our family, which has planned this Viale dei Cipressi. I don't know if you know, 5 kilometers long road in Bolgheri, which has cypresses on each side, which has become like it's a national monument, and it also has become the symbol of Bolgheri a little bit. And this Guidalberto was an ancestor of our family, and he had planned this Viale dei Cipressi. So, you know, it's a way of recognizing somebody from the past of our family.
Well, I have a 2008 here. It's a second bottle. I tasted this last year, and it was fantastic. I highly recommend this wine. It really can keep 20 years, no problem. And it's a baby Sassicaia. The style is the same. The concept is the same, although it changes a little bit in structure, or the grapes are slightly different, right? You have maybe some Merlot, that's right?
60%, 40% Merlot.
Okay. And another project that you make in the Sardinia is Barrua, right?
We used to be partners with them. The project was started together with Takis, but now since 2-3 years we have pulled out of that project.
Ah, okay. Fantastic wine too. Yeah. Come back to Sassicaia. I think this is has all the qualities to be a luxury wine for collectors, and I know I have some heavy collectors watching here, and I will number these qualities. First, rarity. The production is small. Rarity with good distribution. You find Sassicaia all over the world in small quantities, of course. Then is a good return for your investment. The price goes up through the years. Try to buy now an 85 and you'll see. Right, Flavio? Flavio said he pays lots of money for the 85 we had together. Then consistency through the years. I can tell that, I can attest that by the verticals I did with all the tastings. The style and the quality is kept through the years with variations of climate only. Then longevity. The 68 is one of the best Sassicaias today, not only by that time. Today, 68 is fantastic. So no worries keeping the bottle a long time. Then it has a beautiful history, and it provides a great experience drinking whenever you open the bottle. 2016 is very young, but it's already a fantastic wine. Can you tell us about a bit about 15 and 16? 15 was wine of the year, right?
15 was the wine of the year Wine Spectator, and 16 was the vintage that got 100 points. The second vintage that got 100 points from Parker, and both were fantastic years. Maybe 16 was a slightly fresher in general as a vintage compared to 15, but they were fantastic years. Vintages not only for us, for the whole Bolgheri area, and so Bolgheri really had always great vintages, but especially 15 and 16, one after the other. It was really fantastic, and last year we have celebrated the 25 years of the Consorzio here in Bolgheri, and it was great to celebrate with these two great vintages just behind us. And
I tasted. Sorry, continue, please.
No, just that especially 16 is very pleasant to drink young. But of course, these are wines, like you said before, that if you manage to wait a little bit before you drink, they get better with age. Especially these very latest vintages, probably best would be to wait 5 to 6 years after bottling before pouring them. I know that sometimes it's difficult. That's why also we have this other wine with Alberto, so that people can drink something else in the meantime, which they can drink younger. We usually consider the peak of maturation between 18 to 20 years, and SASSICAIA can easily age for 40, 50, even 60 years if it's well stored and well kept. Of course, this is a generalization because you can't really apply the same to every single vintage. But generally speaking, this is pretty much the case.
Well, when I did the vertical in Rome, I wrote a complete article and I tried to classify that. And I wrote, SASSICAIA needs at least 10 to 15 years to begin to show his best potential, and 20 to 25 years to reach peak maturity. I suggested vintages from 2001 to now are babies, and you should keep them not open. If you open, you'll be happy, but if you manage to wait, do wait. Then vintages from 2000 back to 92 are teenagers, are already more developed, but not yet in the best. And from 91 back to 80, they're adults. 79 to 68, old guys, but with lots of energy.
Yeah.
Some of them, like 68, it's a young old guy.
At 68, I remember that it was surprisingly still very fresh and very, I mean, you couldn't believe it was from so long ago, right?
Yes, and when I tasted last year again in Rio, was the best wine from the old vintages. From 80 back, the best wine was 68. It's amazing how these wines age. And another question. Someone asked it here. How the young generation of the family are willing to continue the SASSICAIA legacy?
How
the young age? You are the younger.
No, I'm not alone, luckily. You see me today, but it's not just me. We are, in my generation, we are 5 cousins. I'm the youngest, and I am one of my father. And I mentioned at the beginning, my father had a brother and a sister. So I have 4 cousins from my aunt and uncle. And of course, we are, as this is a family-owned company, family-owned estate, which has been in our family for so many generations. Of course, we have every intention of continuing the legacy, not only of SASSICAIA, but of the whole of Tenuta San Guido. We still have also, the horses, like I mentioned before. We have 500 hectares area dedicated to a nature reserve, which was also set up and started by our grandfather. So a lot of legacies to carry forward in the next generations. Mine, and hopefully the one of our children and grandchildren, and so on.
Okay. Any new project in wine coming?
No, I think in wine we are going to consolidate what we have until now. We are producing 3 wines. The other wine is Le Difese that we haven't spoken about. Cabernet Sauvignon and Sangiovese. It's our entry-level wine, which was designed mostly for the Italian market and came out.
Never tried this one. I don't know this one.
We have to arrange this so that you can try.
Yeah, thank you.
And the next project is going to be the construction of a winery for Guidalberto, which is being at the moment produced together with Le Difese in a different building than SASSICAIA. But the project for the next 5 years is to build a winery for Guidalberto by himself. And it's going to be, again, taking an old building which already exists in the States and transforming it into a winery. It's an old factory for bricks, to make houses. The factory has been closed.
Might be beautiful.
It will be quite impressive. So next time, if you plan to trip in the next years, you definitely have to stop by here, Marcelo, and have a look.
Yes, I'll be for the Anteprimas in February, so I'll try to pass by. Yes, yes, let's arrange this visit. And one delicate question: you are a luxury wine, and the luxury market is very delicate and difficult to work. It's not a common consumer.
No.
How do you manage to please this very high level consumer?
Well, I think for us it's a continuous challenge and also a stimulus to always try to do the best year after year. And we have quite a we're not an old winemaking estate. As you said, we are making wine since 50, but still we have quite a track record of consistency, and so we are for sure not willing to compromise anything of the quality. And I think the consumers can trust that we're trying to deliver the best to them year after year, especially because as we are, you know, as I said before, family-owned company, we have views that are quite long-term. So sometimes maybe we make investments for the quality of our wines, which are not immediately rewarding economically, but are more meant for the long term. And we are run here. The company is run by a team of professionals, and therefore the new generation has a very strong setup to continue the work that has been done so far. And this how to please the consumer of who has very high expectations is to keep the standard always as high as possible.
Yes, what calls me attention is that this standard never changed, never tried to be anything else. I told you, when I taste verticals of many icon wines, they changed a lot through years until they find the right, let's say, formula, the right blend, the right wood, the right style, the right extraction. SASSICAIA seems to be at this point since the 68, since the first vintage. That's amazing. That's amazing. That's amazing. Compliments to Takis and to the family.
Well, we're very lucky because in Hungary we have such an extraordinary territory that, of course, I mean, SASSICAIA, as I said before, has a very strong territory character. So we are lucky to be in a place like this, and we are trying to do the best, also to respect this territory, which is giving to us so much year after year. So, like this nature reserve and this 1,500 hectares of wood. I mean, it's we try to create a certain biodiversity as well. We have the vineyards which are mixed with the olives and olive yards. It's not very practical if you have to work in a vineyard and you have rows of olives in between, but you know, everything combined gives a special character to the wine, so it's really worth it.
Well, I would say that people who are watching, they can send questions, please. Don't be shy. And well, I was showing with Alberto 2008 here, and in my tasting notes, I say that very nice. Tasted last year, 2008, with 12 years. Nice fruit, fine tannins, picking, ready, but with a life ahead, maybe 5 to 10 years. It's a baby SASSICAIA in style. And now, that's SASSICAIA 2016. I think it's the best SASSICAIA in the last decade, maybe. In the young vintages, since the 80s, I think it's the best SASSICAIA to me. And to me, it was 100 points. And I tasted together with 2015, and I confess I prefer 16.
Yeah.
15 is fantastic one, of course, but 16 has some seduction plus.
Did you think of when you did the tasting in Rio? How did you find the 1985?
Was fantastic. Yes, same level as in Rome. 88, I think, was maybe a little bit better in Rome. I think in Rome, the best for me was 88.
Yes.
88, together with 85, but 85 is more famous. So 88 was a surprise to me. In Rio, to me, the best were 68, 85, and 2016.
Wow, thank you.
Among many others, of course. Well, you have the complete tasting in my website, so you can check every comments on every vintage. But the young ones, 16, for me, is something incredibly. The balance, the integration is something amazing. It's a profound wine with firm structure, but still very young. Pleasure now, but you can keep 30 years easily. Easily, it has structure and integration and balance to be forgotten in the cellar. Of course, nobody would forgotten about SASSICAIA, right? Someone is commenting here that would appreciate very much tasting one of those old guys I mentioned here. So Priscilla, I would like to, before we finish, invite you to come to Brazil. I invited you to this tasting in Copacabana Palace last year, but your agenda didn't allow.
I hope I can start traveling soon because my, as a road company, I am the person who travels to represent the family, the company, to go to tastings and visit the export countries. And all my trips, of course, were cancelled from March to basically February next year. Yeah, everything cancelled. So hopefully the situation will get better, and then when I start traveling again, I absolutely have to make a visit to Brazil because I came for pleasure, but never there for business. So
okay, I'll be in Tuscany in February, and I bring you by the hand. We have a question here. How the winery managed to keep the quality unchanged throughout the years in a changing environment? Good question.
Changing environment meaning probably that with the warming up of the climate.
Probably, yes, probably. And I can add one more observation. The alcohols never went up high in SASSICAIA.
Yeah, well, the first question about the changing environment, again, the fact that we are close to the sea here in Bolgheri doesn't make it so drastic, this global warming situation. So we have seen in the last years a general going up of the temperatures, but it's more like in the long term. Over the last 10 years, we also had some vintages which were quite cool and fresh, like, for example, 2002 or 2014. And even now, I mean, this month of March, April, May, they were quite fresh. Now we are in the middle of June, and still it's quite fresh to eat outside in the evening. So, and it was raining until 2 weeks ago. It had rained a few days during the month of May. So it depends. It depends. It's not the same every year. It's true that generally there is a increase in the temperatures, like everywhere in the world. But I think we feel it a bit less here in Bolgheri due to the impact of the sea and of the sea breezes. So it's less pronounced, this hiring of the temperatures. We normally try to harvest quite early, and we don't wait for the grapes to be over mature. And we also are lucky to have the vineyards quite high up on the hills, and we can select from the best plots the grapes that we want to use for SASSICAIA. And then in the winery, of course, maybe we do shorter macerations, like I mentioned before. I mean, we try to counteract, but not a constant challenge every year that we have to deal with. Maybe 17 was a little bit warmer and drier compared to 16 and 15, but then again, 18 was fresh and quite rainy. So it's not like a general rule.
And Ravan said your father was in Brazil a few years ago. So yes, the family knows the way to come. And one question, this year, 2020, with the coronavirus and all, how was the effect on the wine or on the market for you?
Well, we luckily having only 3 labels, and the production is not gigantic. So we had kind of allocated all the wines before the month of March. So we personally didn't have, I mean, we have a little bit of delays in the collection, but none of our importers have canceled anything that they have ordered already. So,
and for the harvest, do you think it will be normal harvest?
We never stopped working, you know, agriculture never really stopped in Italy. And we continue working in the vineyards, in the classic agriculture. And if things continue like this, hopefully, if we go more and more towards a situation where this virus is disappearing, I think the harvest will be, I mean, we will work normally. And if the temperatures continue like this, it doesn't seem like it's going to be a very hot summer, but we don't know. I mean, for now, temperatures have been absolutely in the average, even quite cool in the spring.
Okay, any last question, people? More compliments than questions. And a lot of people willing to taste SASSICAIA again and visit the Tenuta. So Priscilla, anything else you would like to say? We still have some last minutes.
I would like to urge people who haven't been to Bolgheri, really, if people come to Italy, come to Toscana, it's really worth stopping by and visiting, because apart from Tenuta San Guido, there are so many nice wines. We're about 60 producers now. When the consortium was started in 1994, there were 7 producers. Now we are 60. So a lot of change in 25 years, and very interesting to come and see. It's quite a special part of our country.
Well, my father, well, I'm from an Italian family, Copello. Yes, and my father used to say, Italy is the most beautiful country when you think of historic places. And the most beautiful country when you think of natural places is Italy also. So we are 100% Italy in my family. Of course, Brazil too. Havan is thanking Priscilla, and me thank you. And thank you, Priscilla. See you soon in Tuscany.
Yeah.
Okay. And this interview will be recorded and will be available now in Instagram.
Thank you very much, Marcelo. It was great. Very nice seeing you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Ciao.
Bye-bye. Ciao, ciao.
Bye.
Cheers. Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers. Ciao.